This episode of Mikey on Mute is brought to you by Little Jerk Society. Little Jerk Society is a clothing company fueled by the raw energy of creative rebellion, celebrating those who march to the beat of their own drum. They care deeply about mental health and believe in a world where everyone can thrive, regardless of their challenges. Use promo code MikeyOnMute to save 15% on your order at littlejerkclothing.com. Again, that's littlejerkclothing.com. And remember, use promo code MikeyOnMute, all one word, to save yourself 15%. Go off and make a change.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mikey on Mute. As always, I'm Mikey, coming off mute to tell you my mental health story and talk to others about their journey. Today, I am stoked to be joined by Kristen. She is the host of Superstitions and Traditions Podcast. Kristen, how are you tonight?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you. For the audience listening, Superstitions and Traditions is a podcast for those who are into, obviously, superstitions, traditions, history. I believe, what was the line in The Occasional Traditional Asshole? I think that's one of my favorite lines from that.
Yeah, the occasional historical asshole, we find them.
Hey, it happens to all of us. So appreciate you coming on. It means a lot. We kind of connected through Instagram and we've been chit-chatting, so I'm glad we could set this up.
Me too. I'm excited.
Excellent. So from what I kind of saw, has it been roughly like a year that you've been doing the podcast, or what's the timeline on that?
Yep, right at a year. It was a year in December.
Gotcha. Okay. And I know one of my fun little things that we did, we just bonded over talking about HH Holmes. I absolutely love anything that's true crime, spooky, anything like that. And Holmes was one of those things that kind of attached to me when I did a walking tour in Chicago. So I definitely know that we kind of were able to chit chat about that the other day.
Yes. Yeah, he was an interesting, and still, I mean, we don't know exactly what all he did or how many people he killed. He wrote 4 confessions prior to his execution. So, and he confessed to killing people that are still alive or were still alive. And I mean, he just made up.
I don't think we can believe a word that guy ever said. So we'll never quite know the full story there.
No.
I know that when we connected, you said that mental health is something that's really important to you. There's family ties, everything like that. I guess I want to know from your side what you're comfortable with, kind of what mental health has looked like in your life, what's important to you. Did it have anything to play with as far as you starting the podcast? I'd really love to just give you some space to share that story.
Okay. We have kind of a long history of mental health issues. My great grandmother was never diagnosed with anything, but she kind of seemed like there was some schizophrenia or paranoia. Interesting story. My maternal grandpa, this is his mother. His father was a police officer in Oklahoma City. And there's rumors he was a dirty cop or had some shady dealings. And when my grandpa was a little bitty boy, he was the youngest. I believe he was around 8 or 9 years old. And he and his 3 brothers and his dad were getting ready to go to his dad's birthday party. It was on his birthday. They saw a truck coming down the road. Well, his dad told him to go hide in some caves that were on the property.
Oh,
so
really?
The 3 boys go and hide in caves. They hear gunshots. When they come out, their dad has been shot and is dead.
Oh, my goodness.
The death was ruled a suicide, and he was shot with his own gun. But my grandpa swears that he heard men arguing in this truck. And so it's just kind of a big family mystery. But he owned a car lot. He had business investments in Oklahoma City, as well as being a police officer. My grandpa's mother took those 3 boys from Oklahoma City and moved back home to Tahlequah, would take no money, no claim, nothing to any of the land, the businesses, took them and ran, and was terrified of something their entire life. Every time I remember visiting her as a kid, every house she had a fence all the way around it. I couldn't visit her. She lived a few blocks from me. I couldn't go to her house without my grandpa. She wouldn't let anybody visit. My grandparents, when I had graduated from high school already, but I was still pretty young. They went to Canada for vacation. They were gone for 2 weeks. And I was in charge of Grandma Bertha, my great grandmother.
Gotcha.
And I can't tell you how many times she called. She thought there was a bomb planted on the fence. It was a Homeland ad that had blown those old newspaper ads that it had blown up against the fence. It scared her.
Sure.
There were city utility men fixing a leak or something in the lot behind her house. One of them had his shirt kind of unbuttoned, but had a shirt on underneath.
Yeah.
And she was terrified of the naked men in her backyard, and just paranoid things. My
this family history has
sister,
been a movie. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, your sister.
I would love to dig in and, hear more of my grandpa's dad's story. My grandpa, he was so young, he doesn't really even remember his dad.
Sure.
Something that traumatic will be stored into your memory for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And he remembers that. But as far as like memories with his dad, he didn't remember any. He remembered life after they moved. They lived actually in a barn. My great grandmother was the youngest of 13 children. And she lived in a barn when she moved back to Tahlequah of one of her sisters. And that's where her and the boys lived while she put herself through college. She had a master's degree. She was an intelligent woman. Had a master's degree, was a principal at a school she taught. As soon as she got my grandpa raised and he got married and moved out, she retired and raised dogs for the rest of her life, where she never had to really leave home.
That's a lot of really cool things. I can't imagine raising a family in a barn. First off, like, I have 2 kids. It's hard enough in a regular home.
Right.
But also to be able to put yourself through, get a master's degree.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And my grandpa was born in 1940. So this would have been mid 40s, late 40s, probably. Raising 3 kids by yourself, putting yourself through school. I am in awe of her, but I know there was some kind of mental health issue there.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like, while it's a very interesting, almost Hollywood story here that's coming out, it definitely plants those seeds that there was something going on a little bit back further. So appreciate you sharing that part.
There was some reason for her to be terrified, to leave and to raise 3 kids in a barn.
Yeah.
Basically, when your husband had money. They owned property, they owned businesses, and she left it all. So, she obviously had a reason. There was a justified reason for her fear, but she never would talk about it or tell anybody anything.
It's so interesting. I know that one of the things that when I was talking to my wife, kind of when we were getting to know each other and throughout the relationship, she was almost amazed by the little I knew about some of my family members. A lot of my family operated on a need to know basis, as I was not in that list of need to know. And so it's been very interesting. We've had family members, go missing. Just
Oh,
there, no
wow.
one knows the full picture. Kind of like if we tie it back to HH Holmes and how he kept hiring people, and firing them so no one saw the big picture. It's
Yeah.
crazy to me that there's just all these missing pieces. So it sounds like there's a lot there, but yeah, whatever that justified reason is, probably never got to you.
No, and it never got to my grandpa. I mean, her son, he never
Right.
dug too deep either, I don't think. I think he heard enough to know it probably wasn't a good idea to dig,
Yeah.
but now I'm 4 generations, 3 generations removed from it. So I don't necessarily think my life will be in danger if I dig, but
Well, we
so
hope not.
yeah.
I know we have all covered and looked at and heard crazy stories, but hopefully everything is past that
I'm
was in
hoping.
danger.
I'm hoping. But
So
yeah, my
definitely, it sounds like you recognize that there was some kind of mental health stuff going on with grandparents and everything like that. Did you see it a lot as far as did that shape childhood with you and family, or was it more towards young adults?
right. Growing up, I didn't really notice or understand, I guess,
Hmm.
with my great grandma. She lived, so far away, and we didn't see her all that much. She and my grandpa's wife, my grandmother, they weren't like best friends. they had a,
That's fair.
a need to get a long relationship, but not going out of their way.
Sure.
So we were much closer to my grandmother's mom than we were to this grandma. Um, so I didn't really, it wasn't until I was an adult. Actually, it was probably that first trip where they left me in charge of grandma that I was like, hey, this, her quirky is, I think there's a little bit more to that.
It's very interesting as we look back because the conversations about mental health are still fairly new as far as
Mhm.
identifying and put phrases to it. And
Right.
you see memes and everything online about, oh, maybe my neighbor who was really into trains, maybe there was more to that. And
Right.
it
Yeah.
is interesting to look back and see those quirks of family members, of friends, or ourselves and go, maybe there was something we should have been paying attention to.
Right. Yeah. 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 Now, after we became adults, my grandparents both passed away in 2017. My grandma had ALS, and she was diagnosed in 2012. Um, she got to the point where she couldn't walk, she couldn't talk, she couldn't hardly even swallow to eat, and
Mm,
she wanted to pass at home. She wanted to stay home, so we kept her home, and we helped grandpa um, for probably 4 years, 3 or 4 times a week after work and on the weekends. I was over there helping grandpa with grandma. And then when we knew it was close to the end, a hospice nurse had come in and let my grandpa know, we're we're not looking at months anymore.
hmm.
And a week to the day of when he heard that news, he had a massive heart attack.
Oh my goodness.
So grandma's their 62nd wedding anniversary. This was just before that. They celebrated it with my grandpa in the hospital and my grandma at home.
Mm,
Um, all he could, I had stayed the night with him that night, and he hollered
mhm.
at me, and
Oh,
he said, I'm sick. I don't feel good. I think I need to go to the hospital. Well, you
mhm.
knew if grandpa said he needed to go to the hospital,
That
he was
he
a
he
lot
was
sicker
serious.
than he wanted you to know.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm trained in first aid and CPR. I'm an instructor. I'm a
Mhm.
certified instructor. And the thought of it being a heart attack never crossed my mind. It wasn't typical heart attack symptoms. Um, so I had my little kids, they were tiny, and grandma, and I couldn't leave the kids. I couldn't leave grandma. So I start calling. I called my mom and her sisters. And I got whoever. I called my mom's oldest sister first because she was the closest. And then I called my mom, who was second closest. And then I called the middle sister. And everybody swarmed kind of all at the same time. And my mom and my stepdad got grandpa to the hospital. It was a heart attack. And all grandpa is saying is, do whatever you got to do to save me. I've got to get home, take care of my wife.
Oh.
He ended up in a bigger hospital, was there for a couple of weeks, went to a skilled nursing facility for rehab afterwards. His kidneys had stopped functioning, so he was on dialysis from it. It was a big mess. So he didn't even get to go to grandma's funeral either. And grandma held on for about 3 weeks before she passed. And then grandpa was at the skilled nursing place and had some kind of episode. They rushed him to the emergency room, and he told us there that he was ready to go home. And so we asked him, are you talking about home on Surrey Drive? Are you talking about heaven? And he said, well, I'm talking about heaven. I'm ready to go be with your grandma. Right. But I want to stop by Surrey Drive on my way. So we took him home, and he was home for about a week, stopped all of the dialysis. And that was horrible. The toxicity and stuff that builds up in your body when your kidneys aren't functioning. He could talk, he could function, but he had no idea who we were. He had no idea who he was. I would have to pretend to go to the grocery store because he was so worried about somebody named Peggy. We don't know anybody named Peggy, but Peggy didn't have water, and Peggy didn't have groceries, and Michelle didn't have groceries. And it wasn't just we'll take care of it. No, it had to be fixed right now. It was just, and he was always such a strong man, and it was hard. That was hard to watch. And it was a lot harder on my little sister. I'm a social worker, but I am a trained rehabilitation training specialist, a direct support professional. I work with people with developmental disabilities, and I have done this for 22 years. So I've had all sorts of training on how to reposition and lift and deal with feeding tubes and deal with behavioral issues. And I mean, I've had a ton of training on how to deal with this stuff. So I come in and I stayed the 3 weeks with grandma. I stayed the week with grandpa. But my role was I was the caregiver. I was the one taking care. So I didn't get to really process at that time. I couldn't really until it was done. Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off at all there. No. I mean, it's really tough. I had watched my mom go through, a cancer battle where they gave her 6 months and she fought 7 years. My mom was stubborn in the best way. But at that point when they call and say, hey, we have a limited amount of time and all that stuff, it's really hard to take care of everything and the situation and others around you and process those emotions that you're going through, because this is still a loved one that you're losing. And so I understand that it's got to be really, really tough while you're doing everything. And it sounds like while you were kind of taking everything else, maybe all those emotions or more of the emotions kind of fell on your sister.
Yeah. She wanted to be there. But just walking into grandma's bedroom was overwhelming to her. And it got to the point where I love you. I'm glad you're here. She wanted to be there for grandma, but in her mind, her justification was I have to support my big sister. Mm-hmm. And she's like, well, I've got to be here for you. You know what? I can't. I am taking care of my daughter. My baby was not in school yet. She was 3. Mm-hmm. I had 2 in school and grandma, and I'm like, I can't. I know you want to help me, but you are not helping me. And I can't take care of you and my kids and my grandma and, support my mom and my aunts and my cousins. And as everybody's coming in and out, I cannot have you here. You have to go.
Yeah.
So she left and she would come, every day. Like, that's fine, come every day, but please don't stay.
That's a really tough conversation to have, especially with family and people close to us, to be able to, at least I imagine, like anytime I've had to lay kind of a boundary, like, hey, I understand you want to be here, but it's not working. So
Right.
kudos, because that's such a tough conversation to kind of balance. Okay, I don't want to upset them. They're my family. I love them and care for them, but I also need to be honest and, hey, you're not helping here.
Right, right. My sister was bipolar, and we knew this at that time. So, there's a little bit more than just grief going on with her too. So, um, after my grandparents passed, my grandma passed on May 21st of 2017, and exactly 2 months later to the day, on July 21st, my grandpa passed. And for me, I was sad, but it was kind of like a natural order of things. Like, that is what was supposed to happen. I was in my late 30s. Your grandparents, I was lucky to have them as long as I did. I was lucky that my children got to meet them. My sister, that they were her safe space.
Yeah.
Like, when life was too rough on her and she needed to crumble, that's where she went, was to my grandparents. So the grief for her was 1,000 times worse than it was for me. She was already diagnosed as bipolar. She had had a history of drug abuse in the past, and she kind of fell back into that after my grandparents died. Primarily marijuana. And she had her medical license, which we're in Oklahoma, so it's legal as long as a doctor. If you sneezed one time in your life or were born in a hospital, you qualify in Oklahoma for a medical marijuana card.
And yeah.
Yeah, it's like the easiest thing in the world to get. So she had her license. What we found out after, because she just was spiraling and just getting more bizarre stories and acting strange, and we find out afterward she was diagnosed with about 2 years after my grandparents died, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And we found out at that point that marijuana, while it's good for a lot of mental health issues and different issues, it exacerbates schizophrenia.
Gotcha. So it had the adverse effect of
Yes.
how it helps most of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So her last couple of years were incredibly rough. I chased that girl all over Oklahoma. She decided at one point in February, in barefoot, in a pair of sweats and a tank top, in sleeting rain, that she was ready to be homeless. She wanted to live as a homeless person. And walked almost 30 miles because she couldn't be homeless anywhere. She had a specific town she wanted to be homeless. I'm like, I just can't. I followed her around in my car. She'd come knock on my window. I'm hungry. Can I have some money for food? No, we have food at home. Get in the car and we'll go home and eat. But if you want to live homeless, you figure out how homeless people eat.
Yeah.
So she called the police on me.
Oh no, for not giving you money, or
for stalking, actually, is what she told them. I was stalking
okay.
her.
When
After
you
about 3
went to like
days.
the specific place where she had to be homeless.
Yeah. I sat in my car for 3 days and just kind of followed her around and watched her. And she finally got tired of me telling her, oh, she'd not, I'm not going to give you money, but I'll take you home and feed you, or,
Right.
So she finally got tired of that. And walked into a fire station and had them call the police. So this officer goes and talks to her and then comes out and talks to me and says, I said, I guess I am stalking her. Like, she's a mother of 5.
Right.
She has 5. She's my little sister. It's February in Oklahoma. It's cold.
I don't understand how, like, I get that there are some definitions, and especially when it comes to legalities and everything like that, but how do you not, like you said, stare at them and say, this is my little sister, the conditions are terrible, there are kids involved here, how, I'm not stalking her, I'm trying to bring her home.
Right. And he said, well, you're gonna have to let her go. Just, let her reach out to you. And I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna bring that kid home.
Right.
These are my dogs. I'm sure you hear them.
It's all good.
They're putting their 2 cents in. Yeah. So I end up leaving. Called my aunt. So my aunt was able to help her for a little while, and then my mom went and picked her up, and we finally got her home. But at one point she had a warrant out for her arrest in the county this town was in. And it was a speeding ticket she got that she never paid. And this is during COVID. So I look at the cop and I'm like, she has a warrant. Will you take her to jail? And he looked at me like I was the most horrible person on the planet. You want your sister in jail? I want my sister safe.
Yeah, if it means off the
so
streets.
Which of course it was during COVID, so they weren't picking up people on tickets,
Right.
They weren't just putting those people in jail. but could you please? I mean,
right,
can you make an exception? And he decided she wasn't a harm to herself or to anybody else, so there wasn't a reason for a 72-hour hold.
Right.
And I just had to let her be homeless. Yeah. So anyway, we ended up getting her home. She ended up coming back to my house for a little while. She kind of stayed in between my house and my mom's house.
Sure.
But the weirdest thing about the whole situation was the more her schizophrenia progressed, the more she kind of she sought relationships that were years past. Like friends from kindergarten is who she wanted to find, and
interesting.
Our biological dad's family she ended up reaching out to one of our uncles that she hadn't talked to in several years. And he came and picked her up to leave him one, please. Came and picked her up to take her to dinner and just get her out of the house. And they ended up drinking and were on a motorcycle. And it was kind of sleeting, raining outside. He swerved to miss a box in the road and ended up hitting another box that he didn't see. And when he did that, the motorcycle, he lost control of it. And my sister flew off the back, hit the ground so hard head first that it buried her up to her shoulders. Like her head bore into the ground so far that she was completely buried. She lived for 6 days after that.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that girl was stubborn.
Yeah.
So
what a terrible, terrible accident. And
it was, and then,
so
I had a lot of guilt.
Yeah. I can imagine that after trying to reach out and help and all that had kind of led up to that, there has to be some kind of, like I said, guilt that you said that messed with you a little bit. And that's a hard one to deal with. Like, is this real guilt or is this more so, just kind of like a
Right.
survivor's thing?
Right.
It's really tough.
But that was in 2021, March of 21. And I still, I knew that I had some depression going on, which I knew after my grandparents, I had some depression going on. So I got on antidepressants. And then in between my sister and my grandparents dying and my sister dying, I had some major health issues. I have lupus. I ended
Okay.
up on chemo for a year because I had developed vasculitis. Anyway, it ended up being a big mess. And so
Mhm.
while I'm going through my health issues, I'm like, please increase my antidepressants because, I can't deal. And then my
Yeah.
sister. And so still, let's increase them one more time because, it was what do I do? I lost my grandparents. And aside from work, they consumed a lot of my time.
Mhm.
Then I was sick, which consumed a lot of my time. And I went straight from that to chasing my sister, which consumed a lot of my time, to all of a sudden now I'm just going to work and coming home. I've got my kiddos. I see her kiddos um, pretty much every other weekend. I have one of them lives with me. Um, then she's got four others that I see
Mhm.
regularly. But I had so much free time that was just, what do I do? I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I can imagine
So,
that's quite a change. I know that you and I had spoken about kind of a similarity of critical of ourselves, and that starts to creep in the more time that you have
right.
to be with yourself. So I really love that you said you needed something to channel that into. You needed to kind of
Hmm.
take that energy, and that's one of the driving forces that brought you to starting the podcast, if I
Yeah.
remember our
Yep.
conversation.
Yeah. There was about 2 years where I just kind of went through life and worked a lot. Just, I mean, I worked a whole lot more than I needed to. My job, I'm on call.
Hmm.
Um, so I have to be available, but I made myself really available, a lot more available than I needed to be.
Hmm.
Um, and then at some point it was just that I've got to have something.
Yeah.
So that's when I started the podcast. I love history. I love to read. I love to research. I love to dig. And so let's do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do an amazing job. It's such a great presentation
Oh, thank you.
and thought out and everything like that. I know we're coming up here on time. I feel like we could sit here and I could listen to you talk for hours, and it felt like a blank. So I know that when I had reached out to you, I said, "Hey, was there anything you wanted to make sure I asked you?" And you said, "No, not really, nothing specific." And so I guess I just want to know here a quick answer. What is something, a goal for yourself in the future now that you got about a year of the podcast in? It can be personal, it can be professional with the podcast or something else. Kind of what's your next big goal for yourself?
I don't know. My like trajectory thinking, I've got two kids. I've got one through high school. I've got one in college. She's 19, almost 20, but I still have two little ones. So one's in fifth grade, one's in seventh grade. Right now, I'm happy.
Hmm.
I love my job. I got a promotion a year ago. I'm like the area director now for my agency, which was my goal from the time I started working there.
Yeah,
The job I have now, that was my goal. And so
yeah,
I've got it. And I'm happy with it. I love it. I love the podcast. But as far as like big changes or what I want to do just for myself,
hmm,
um, I'm going to plan that when I get my kids through school.
makes perfect
So
sense to me.
right now, it's raise these girls, uh, make sure they're decent
Yeah,
humans, and when they're gone, I plan on traveling. I toss lots of things around, like being a little shopkeeper in some eclectic town like Eureka, or, move into a big city. I've never lived in a big city. Just, I throw lots of things around. And when I get L through high school in 2032, I will decide.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you could tell the listeners, where can they find you? Like I said, we connect on Instagram, and I know you're on most platforms, but if you just want to spit out a couple socials they can follow you on.
All right. I'm on Instagram and TikTok, and YouTube, and Buzzsprout. So I'm on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, things, whatever podcast platform Buzzsprout.
Yeah, absolutely. If everyone just wants to search Superstitions and Traditions Podcast, if you're following me on Instagram, watch my story. I'm always sharing different ones out, and I absolutely love listening to Kristen's podcast. So
thank you,
Kristen. I can't thank you enough. I feel like we have so much more that we could talk about, and I hope we can reconnect again soon. So
absolutely, yes.
Excellent. Right, anything else before we wrap up here?
I just want you to know I really enjoy yours as well. Just the fact that you are self-aware and have taken ownership, and it's something I never did. I didn't do until recently. Like, my mental health I'm fine and doing stuff, to block it. So
it's really tough. I mean, I spoke about it a little bit on my episode where I talked about partial hospitalization and seeing the young 20-year-olds that were taking control of their life. And my words to them before I left were just like, I'm so glad you guys are doing this now. Like, it took me until my 30s to figure out what's going on and really take this serious. So if I can sit and talk and it resonates with somebody, great. If not, at the end of the day, it's me helping kind of fill in some blanks on my side. So it's a win-win. But excellent. Well, again, I probably sound like a broken record, but thank you for joining me on this.
Thank you.
Everyone that's listening on the podcast, again, check out Kristen on Superstitions and Traditions Podcast. And before I decide which woods I want to go live out as a hermit once the kids are old enough, this is Mikey going back on mute. Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode of Mikey on Mute is brought to you by Dubby Energy. Dubby is a clean energy drink loaded with vitamins and nootropics. Dubby is sugar-free, has 0 calories, and 0 artificial coloring. Use promo code MikeyOnMute to save 10% on your order at dubby.gg. That's DUBBY.GG. And remember, promo code MikeyOnMute, all one word, will save you 10%.